Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. So, welcome to the third and final Q&A this retreat. You're welcome to ask any questions.
Okay, I'll start then. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the mechanics, so to speak, of sharing or dedicating merit. Because I was wondering, is there some sort of merit account? So is that a karmic currency, and is there an interest rate? Maybe. And like how exactly does the shared merit benefit the recipient? So especially thinking here about beings who are stuck in lower realms, obviously.
Yeah. So, when we talk about sharing merit, like at the end of a Dhamma talk or meditation or something like that. So just to clarify, the way I understand it to be is you're really sending out loving kindness and you're sharing your loving kindness with all beings. So it's another way of practicing loving kindness. Now, the mechanics of sharing merit to, say, people or beings who are in the lower realms or even in the higher realms, the Deva realms. There are stories in what is known as the Petavatu and the Vimanavatu. So the Petavatu has to do with hungry ghosts, and the Vimanavatu has to do with certain devas and deva realms and things like that. So I don't know where it might be. I think it might be in the minor collection in the Khuddaka Nikaya. I'm not sure, but I got this from David Johnson, the Petavatu and Vimanavatu. And basically in there are stories of how beings are told to dedicate merit in order to bring that person or that being out of the hungry ghost realm, for example. There's a particular story I recall because I remember reading it for one of the talks I gave at Dhammasukha. It was the Halloween special talk on hungry ghosts.
I
might look for that one. And in that one, there was one story of where there was a woman who became a hungry ghost. And the idea was for her to continue on to the next life, she would have actually experienced a hell realm in her next life. But some sailors came across her and they were told to provide some requisites to the Sangha or to a Sangha member. And by doing so, dedicating that merit to that particular being. And so what happened is because of that merit, that being then experienced, rather than a hell realm, the Deva realm. So the idea is, or the mechanics of it in terms of how it works, is to be able to go to a Sangha member and provide them some requisites and then dedicate that merit of having provided those requisites to that Sangha member towards the person that you have in mind. So that may this merit be shared with, this merit is dedicated towards so-and-so person. And so the idea is that that person, that being that has gone into a next life, will experience the effect of that merit as a karmic ripening at some point or another in their life.
Including the, well, even on the basis of formations that arise for them, like, I mean, not necessarily, obviously, in real time, but is that how it works? Or
Yeah, so it would basically elevate, let's say, their formations or make their formations wholesome. If we were to look at it from the perspective or the context of formations, what's happening is that merit is being felt by them as an experience. It's some kind of a pleasant experience that they, or some kind of mental experience that they feel, which then gives rise because of the contact with that experience, gives rise to specific formations.
Okay.
So those formations then help them to be even more elevated, even more uplifted, even more so on, till they take the next rebirth in a more wholesome plane.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'm trying to think of how I could phrase, I was going to say as a question rather than a comment, but take it as both, I guess, asking for your response. It's in response to that about merit. If you remember at the Halloween thing, there was someone who typed in a question, did the Buddha ever say this? And you said no. And that was me, as you may have guessed. Most of those stories, as far as I know, come from Hinduism. And they're kind of folk tales that, as happens in many, many traditions, get picked up by whatever the developed religion is, so-called developed religion is, and used, appropriated for that religion's purposes, as Christianity and Judaism and others have done. They seem to me to be completely foreign to what I know of what the Buddha himself actually said, and very, very much in the Hindu tradition, where as soon as someone dies, there's an incredible importance on doing all of the correct rites and making the offerings in order to aid that person on their passage into the afterlife. But of course, in a very different sense of what kamma is and what the goal is, really. So yeah, I guess that's the comment part. And the question would be, what do you think of that?
I do recall, actually. I do recall that question. And I don't think I've ever personally come across it. But, you know, there was a comment by somebody on that video who noted, actually, there was one of the stories in which the Buddha did mention something about it. But it could have still been in the Petavatu. But I do understand what you're saying in terms of the appropriation from Brahmanical and Hindu traditions. I think what they did was, instead of saying, what they call it is tarpanam, and they call it something to do with the pitar, which means the ancestors. So you help the pitar tarpana, which is helping the ancestors to make sure that they have a better journey in the afterlife, and so on. So I do recognize that, and that's definitely important and worth mentioning. And it does deviate from really what is the essence of the path, which is just freedom from suffering in this life. But I think the intention behind that also uplifts the person. It helps them be uplifted as well.
Yeah, that I could see would be very much, as you started out saying, the offering of loving kindness. So yeah.
I also can add a comment. I don't think that it is in the way of giving your own kamma away or things like that, because in the 5 daily recollections, which you can find in Anguttara Book of Fives, number 57, it says, I am the owner of my kamma, I am born of my kamma, I live supported by my kamma, I will inherit my kamma, whatever I do, whether good or evil, that I will inherit. So I don't think you can see this sharing of merit as being able to give your kamma away to help another being as such. That would be at least how I understand it.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that too, because yeah, you are the inheritor of your karma, and nobody can take your karma away from you. I mean, this is an idea that's taken from, let's say, some New Age beliefs and things like that, where, you know, the karma can be mitigated by certain things, and people can take away negative karma and things like that. No, absolutely not.
But I do feel that
yeah,
you might influence other people so that they are able to create better karma by your example,
exactly.
or whatever.
And I would also put forward the idea that even just sending loving kindness, as we do with regards to sharing merit, has some kind of effect. Obviously, it's not scientifically proven, but I would say that there is some kind of effect to be felt by the individual who receives that loving kindness in one way or another.
Mm.
Whether it's because the person who is sending loving kindness, in this case, let's say a little more practical example of they are sending loving kindness to a person, but then that translates to loving and kind words or a loving and kind tone of speech and loving and kind actions in one way or another, and that person experiences them. Now, as to when we talk about sending loving kindness out all throughout and maybe another person out somewhere else, that's a matter of, that's something else entirely. And some people do feel it and some people don't. And if they feel it, they feel it. But we can't really speak about how that whole process works, except to say that there are cases or there are examples of people who have reported that when they sent loving kindness to somebody halfway around the world, they somehow felt it, or they somehow were reminded of them and decided to call them, or whatever it was. So in the same way, I think using that principle, the idea of sharing merit or dedicating merit to another person in Hungry Ghost realm would be, as I said in the previous answer, where that experience is felt and the feeling or the contact with that experience is what gives rise to, let's say, the potentials for wholesome formations to come about, or to strengthen potentially wholesome formations that can then take root at the dissolution of that life to then give rise to a new, a better plane.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Vaguely tied into that, I was also wondering about, well, they like officially in Theravada Buddhism, unlike in certain Mahayana traditions, like mind-to-mind transmission isn't a thing really, or at least it's not spoken of. I mean, from the impression that I got in certain places, under the hood, there's still quite a bit going on. And certainly what you just said about the loving kindness, the effect it has on others, and certainly I have felt it. It is a kind of transmission, if you will. So I was wondering if you have any more comments on that.
Yeah, I think, based on my own experience, we did like an experiment while I was in Dhammasukha, for example. And there were 4 of us over there. And so we were going through each of the jhanas and, first, second, third, and fourth jhana and so on. And then we did a little different experiment where I said, okay, let's see if we can send out loving kindness to each. So I'm going to send loving kindness out to this particular person, and then this person is going to send out loving kindness to them, and just see what happens and see if you feel it. And so we did it. And in the case of one individual, they started sending out loving kindness. And the other person who was the subject or, the receiver of that loving kindness or compassion, they said they felt this immense like wave of relaxation just coming into them. That was their subjective experience. It was an interesting experience when the experiment was done with oneself and this other particular individual. And I sent out loving kindness to them. And what they said was they were unable to send loving kindness back because the force of that loving kindness was so huge that it was like almost physical, like it was pushing them back. Now, if that's a placebo, if that's a subjective experience, that's what it was. But regardless, it definitely uplifted people's minds.
Mm. Mm. And do you think
I wonder if there can be...
Sorry.
No, I would just say, I wonder if there could be some way to be able to, create some kind of a rigorous scientific experiment that can see what's actually happening, as you said, under the hood of the mind. And if there's something going on, or if it's a placebo effect, or who knows.
Difficult research design. I mean,
yeah.
So. But yeah, interesting.
There was one individual who told me about something known as the morphic field, a morphogenetic field, which is what they're contemplating could be happening when it comes to these. Who knows?
Well, there's certainly some form of information that gets transmitted in one form or another. But I was also thinking about the, like, for example, I mean, certain more esoteric Buddhist sects use it to transfer understanding of the Dhamma, if you will, from one person to another, allegedly. So, as I said, from, you know, what I've seen or been around in Theravada, it's not really talked about, but still my impression is that certainly in some monasteries there are things going on, obviously only among within the monastic community, but anyway, it's probably difficult to say anything about that because he would be part of that community. Yeah, anyway, interesting. But also, like, vaguely related to that again, then the abhiññās, the higher knowledges or the powers. I mean, again, I know that both in the suttas, for example, it is generally cautioned against indulging in them for obvious reasons, because people can get such an unhealthy obsession with siddhis or iddhis. But I was wondering, like, and I understand, if I understand correctly, then the attainment of the jhanas is like the prerequisite for being able to start developing them at all, if one is interested in developing them at all. But are they related to attainment levels then, or is that basically, yeah, once you have good skill of the jhanas, you can go that way if you're so inclined? And then also another question, which I don't quite understand. There are the 6 powers, but then often the direct understanding of the Dhamma is also understood to be an abhiññā. So is that then some kind of direct download you may get after a certain level of whatever attainment skill?
Yeah. So when we talk about the six powers or the 6 abhiññās, they're basically what they're known as are super knowledges or higher knowledges. And they're basically categories of, let's say, powers. You have telepathy, you have doing certain things with the 4 great elements, manipulation of the 4 great elements, which lead to things like walking on water, or walking in the air, or diving deep into the earth, and so on, or being able to become many bodies, and things like that. So this is all manipulation of basically molecules, so the different states of matter. This is what's really going on. Then you have the divine year and the divine eye. And so the divine year is clairaudience, being able to recognize things from vast distances, even celestial distances. But along with that, being able to read others' minds and things like that. Now, I really don't know why you would want to read other people's minds. I think your own mind is quite enough filled with love.
True.
But then you have the divine eye, which is being able to have clairvoyance, being able to do things like remote viewing, or things like seeing celestial objects or beings going through the different realms of existences, and things like that. Then you have the knowledge of past lives, knowledge of your own past lives. So this is getting deeper into understanding the formations, the impressions of the mind that cause the choices that you made in previous moments in one life or in previous lives before that. That allows you to get a deeper understanding of dependent origination, because now you start to see how intention is influenced by formations and how formations influence intention, and so on. then you start to see the arising and passing away of beings. So you're able to then see how beings arise according to their kamma and how they fall, cease according. And then the final is really what is known as the destruction of the defilements, the destruction of the taints, the destruction of the asavas. Now, there are people with inborn traits, or as we understand in the suttas, and even outside of the suttas, because of being in the Himalayas and other places, that there are people who report or who claim that they can read others' minds, or who can do certain kinds of siddhis or iddhis, as you said in Pali. And so they didn't develop jhana necessarily, but within this particular, let's say, tradition or this particular school of thought, the idea is you need a jhanic mind. And really what that means is you need a mind that is collected enough. And then we talk about the iddhipadas. And those are the four bases of spiritual power. And those are needed for any of the higher knowledges. Those are needed for any of the 6 higher knowledges, which means when you are in jhana, whether you know it or not, you are developing padas, but not for the sake of developing psychic faculties, but for the sake of the destruction of the taints. So none of these, with the exception of the 6th higher power, have to do anything with the attainments. Only the 6th one, which is the destruction of the asavas, is basically a destruction of any of the factors for rebirth or any more being. And so when you attain arahantship, then you are an arahant who has the 6th higher knowledge. But that is always associated with the arahant. And then you have different types of arahants. There are the arahants who have developed the 6 higher knowledges, or who haven't developed the 6 higher knowledges. And then there are the arahants who have the analytical knowledge. And there are those who don't have the analytical, and so on. But an arahant, by definition, is known as a kinasava, one who has destroyed the taints, one who has destroyed the defilements. And by that definition, they have attained that particular higher knowledge, the 6th higher knowledge.
Okay. So would that then also, I mean, the whole issue of having direct understanding of the Dhamma would then also be like having the complete picture, which basically means having attained arahantship. Is that the case?
Right. So when you go through the attainments, how it's understood is you have like a preview, or you have some understanding, and then it becomes clearer with each attainment of what the Dhamma is, in essence, the links of dependent origination and how they work. And then in arahantship, you have a complete understanding of that. So because of that complete understanding, there's no more fuel for the taints from arising. The reason the taints arise in the previous attainments is because there is still an I am there. There is still a clinging of self to that experience, that post-cessation experience. There's still a identification with it. There's still craving for it to happen again. But then the entry into arahantship would indicate that that mind sees it for what it is, that experience of cessation and the experience of post-cessation and touching or making contact with the nibbana element, all of that is impersonal. All of that is anatta. So none of it is taken to be a source of clinging or crave for. And therefore you have the destruction of being, the desire for being, taint of ignorance, and taint of sensual craving. In fact, in the case of the anagami, the taint of sensual craving is gone anyway, because they have no more sensual craving. But the taint for being is still there, and the taint of ignorance is still there. So that is completely destroyed when you in our.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I have some questions, a few questions more specifically about practice, I suppose, closer to my practice, I suppose. One, well, to do with cessation and path and fruition and such. One is, I think, in the readings from kamma, There was the one of the questions and answers, was it Bahia, where he asked the right question finally, but at the end instead of at the beginning. In there, he asked, I think is it that one?
It's Kamabu, I think you're talking about.
Okay.
Kamabu. Yeah.
I should get the names right so he's not maligned. He asks at one point, how does one enter into cessation? And the response is that the mind is prepared before entering into cessation. And then he says, well, how does one exit cessation? And is given the same response. And I can see how we are preparing our minds for entering cessation, but I don't, how is it that we are preparing the minds for exiting cessation? This addresses partly the fear of that the self feels, or myself feels. I assume it's fairly common in confronting the notion of, or the approach of cessation. What if it's forever?
Right. It won't be forever, and you're not going to die. So that's going to be
sure, no one ever has.
I'll let you know. I mean, so far I've never heard of anybody dying. So, but that's an interesting one, because Kamabu Sutta, that whole section, that whole part, is also in Majjhima Nikaya 44, which is the dialogue between Dhammadina and Visakha. And there's a similar kind of statement about cessation, or entering into cessation, in Majjhima Nikaya 43. And there's a difference in language. Now, as to whether that difference in language is because of the Pali, or whether it's because of the English translation of the Pali, we can't be sure, because I have to go through it and see what exactly it says in Pali. But based on the English translation, I can say this much. The understanding is one is an attainment and one is a predetermined experience. So how do you come out of cessation is already predetermined through your intention. So this is for somebody who has already mastered the determinations, and somebody who decides that they want to get into cessation. And so it's prepared to the extent that the mind knows that it'll enter into cessation and be there for a period of time. And then after that period of time, it comes out. Whereas the attainment itself, you cannot intend that attainment. But there's a difference. There's the Nirodha Samapatti, which is the ability to remain in the cessation experience for a predetermined time. And there is the attainment, which has to do with the actual entering into cessation and the weakening or the destruction of certain fetters. That second one, that latter one, happens not through some kind of predetermined. So that's why it's indicated that he does not have the idea that I will enter into cessation, or I am in cessation. Whereas in the first case, there is an intention of remaining in there with the idea that are predetermined to.
Okay.
Now, as for the fear of the cessation experience, that's quite common, actually. I mean, so far, I say that from my experience with the participants that I've had in the retreats that I've conducted. And that really is a couple of things. That's really the conceit starting to fade away. And you start to see that in neither perception and non-perception, where the sense of self is the weakest there. It's receded quite a bit. And so that fear and that anxiety that comes about, and it can manifest in different ways, it can manifest in the physiology, is just the mind that is afraid to what it thinks is death. Because for the mind to die means that the mind stops. So it is kind of a mini death, if you will, from the perspective of the mind, from the perspective of the personalized mind, the mind that takes it personal. And the way to let that go is to see that in itself as a hindrance. So seeing that anxiety and seeing it as being just restlessness and then using the 6 R's to let it go and relax into it and tranquilize, then there's a space between the experience and the actual event. And so when you start to relax into that space, then that anxiety or whatever might happen, or whatever has happened in the way of that fear, that process of fear, dissolves. It dissolves in that tranquility when you take it as a hindrance and you relax it as a hindrance. And you have to do it over and over. You might have to do it over. So with that information or with that understanding, you might not do it the first time around, you might not do it the second time around, but you learn from it. And then eventually it comes to a point where you do recognize that, oh, okay, I've already been here before. I know the fear. I understand the anxiety. I understand this. That understanding is the knowledge and vision of things as they really are. That understanding of seeing it as it actually is, seeing reality as it actually is that equanimity. Because of that equanimity, there's a disenchantment there, because now you've seen it before and you don't care about it anymore. You say, okay, I've seen this experience. I know this experience of fear hasn't done anything to me in the past. It's not going to do anything to me again. And then that develops this passion. And if you stay with it and just relax, and let go of any of the conceit of I am, there is cessation.
Yeah. Thanks. My suspicion has actually been that, especially lately, that this sense of cessation approaching is in fact manufactured by the self in order to set up that fear and thus constructing a hindrance right from the start. And I sense perhaps it happens much more quickly and without such preamble. Generally, does the continue with cessation, generally, is it, this is also coming from your discussion of Nirodha, is it that it's very brief the first time and then it gets longer as you progress through the path?
Usually it is quite brief. Now, the thing is, you can't really tell in terms of the time duration, but it probably lasts only a few minutes. A few moments. Let me correct myself, a few moments. So it might just be a couple of seconds and then come back up and you say, what was that? Now, as for the duration lasting longer, again, you couldn't really tell unless you were somehow timing it and had some brainwave detector or something to be able to indicate, okay, this was how long it was. But I would probably guess to say that it's, again, just a few seconds, just a few moments. It's only when you start to get into developing the experience of getting into Nirodha, conscious manner, intentional manner, is where then you can start to predetermine how long it will be. It could can last anywhere from for a few seconds, if you determine so, to up to 7 days.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Do the sense of relief? Yeah, this is moving into path and fruition, which I haven't really ever understood. I mean, even at a conceptual level. When you speak about relief that is felt, is that stronger with attaining the path, that is the first time, or is it stronger the second time when you?
It's the first time. It seems like it's the first time. The second time around and so on after that, it's not as strong.
So that is the fruition.
There's still relief there. Yeah. There's still relief there, but it's not as potent.
Yeah.
It's the first time around.
Why? Yeah, well, two things, I guess. One is, why are they conceived of separately as path and then fruition? And looking at it from the outside logically, it seems like there are 8 stages. Why are they paired in that way?
Well, I think it comes from the suttas generally. I think there are some cases in the suttas where the Buddha talks about the 8 types of individuals. That is to say, the stream enterer with fruition, and then sakadagami with fruition, anagami with fruition, and arahant with fruition. And my sense of that is that it's just another experience, another cessation experience that solidifies the experience, that solidifies the understanding, that confirms for that particular mind that here it's done. You know, that so in the case of the path, let's say with the stream enter, that's when the fetters are destroyed. And in the fruition is a confirmation that the fetters have been destroyed. In the case of the Sakadagami, it's the weakening and then a confirmation that it's the weak. In the case of the Anagami, it's the destruction of the craving and the aversion. And then the fruition is the confirmation of that. And likewise with the arahant, the destruction of the 5 higher fetters and the confirmation is to destroy. So I would say fruition is more of a confirmatory experience than.
And does one always need to go through fruition, or do people sometimes?
They will go through fruition whether they do it intentionally or not, in the sense that if they have the experience of fruition, they have it in meditation, or they'll have the experience of fruition at death.
Okay. But you couldn't, people don't ever skip from directly having the path experience of, say, Sotapanna and then moving to Sakadagami.
No, I haven't heard of the case.
Oh, okay. I thought I'd give other people a chance.
Well, then I'll just go back to cessation for a bit. Is there, I mean, do I understand it correctly that, well, obviously, if there is an attainment event, then you have an insight into the links of dependent origination arising. But prior to that, is that kind of, God, I don't know how to word this. Are there instances where you kind of dip your toes into the territory, meaning that you kind of have like a mini cessation event, but without necessarily, obviously, even not definitely not clearly seeing links of dependent origination, because then it would be an attainment event. But prior to that, is that kind of like you have an exploratory experience where something arises, but it's not like an in-depth experience of the whole thing.
See, what goes on is when you get into neither perception and non-perception, there comes a point where there are like these, let's say, mini micro cessation events where it's like the mind dips up and down.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's not slot and torpor. It's not slot and torpor because the mind is quite alert, still radiant, still sharp. But it's what's happening is the circuitry that allows for the experience of perception starts to diminish in the brain, mind. And so there's like this like bubble of going into cessation, or what seemingly would be cessation, but not fully. It's just perception coming in and out. Perception and feeling coming in and out. Because now there's no stimuli, external stimuli. Now what's happening is just in the mental realm. And because of the quietude, the immense and utter quietude of the mind, without any mental stimulation, the feeling won't arise as often and eventually won't arise at all. So there are these dips. And then there are also previews, let's say, in the sense of seeing the links of dependent origination prior to a complete cessation experience. And the reason being is you start to get up and close and personal with formations. You actually start to see formations. You start to see the beginning of craving. You start to see how feeling comes up and creates this experience. You start to see when the contact arises in the mind. And they arise in the form of different things like you know, in the mind's eye, so to speak, in the meditation, like little glimmering stars. That's the beginning of craving, starting to see that. Or you see like bursts of light. That's the formations that arise dependent upon the experience of releasing something. Experience release from a hindrance, then you're actually starting to see, because your mindfulness is getting so close and sharp in neither perception, non-perception, that you start to see the formations coming and going based on that experience of release. You are seeing those, but there's not enough depth in the mind until after cessation, where everything is completely let go and there's no clinging. And you're seeing things without that grasping. That's why it said liberation through not grasping, by not grasping, seeing the links of dependent origination without personalizing, without identifying, without grasping, and then the experience of nibbana. That's the end.
Okay, yeah, that clarifies it. Thank you.
Well, I have more, and a couple of questions related to the eightth jhana then. One is fractals. It's the only term I could think of for it. It seemed to me a while ago, while I was in quiet mind, that I kind of did a mini replay of the previous 4 jhanas, but smaller, if that makes, I mean, like fractals. That's the only thing I could think of. And then it occurred to me that in the way that there are 4 jhanas, and then the 4th splits into the arupa, which then splits into the 4 arupa jhanas, maybe in the 8th jhana, then it further splits into these, probably not very significant, but it was an interesting observation, I thought.
When you say fractals, you're talking about the fractals of the experiences of the first 4.
Yeah, exactly. It seemed like, they're in the way that the 4 arupa jhanas in some ways are different from, but repeat the 4 rupa jhanas. It seemed that there were 4 stages in a way. This only happened once, but I was curious about it. Yes, in that sense.
Yeah, there's a couple of things to see there. One is in neither perception or non-perception, there's actually levels of quiet mind. So you start to experience quiet mind in a very dreamlike state. It's like you're awake and asleep at the same time, and you start to see disconnected thoughts and things like that. And then the quiet mind gets even quieter and quieter and quieter and subtler until finally there's nothing there at all. There's no vibration going on at all. Now, the second thing I'll say points to what you were talking about, which is what's quite possible is that you were revisiting, or the same formations that arose dependent upon the experience of those jhanas came about. Because this is really, as I said, at the neither perception, non-perception level, where you come up and close and personal with the formations. So perhaps the formations that arose were from the formations that were induced by the experience prior of the 4 jhanas.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know if I was clear about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. I'll have to think about it if it happens again.
But again, it's not a big deal. It's just one of those things, that you
Yeah.
just let go. That's the more important factor. Formations will arise, and they'll arise in different ways. You'll have experience of jhanas, you'll have experience of past lives, possibly. You'll have experiences from things that seem like from your childhood or from even your infancy, and
Other people's childhood.
well, could have been yours in a past life, who knows? But regardless of what that quality of formation is, when you experience it, all you have to do is let it go. Just keep letting go.
Yeah. The other, I suppose, the last question on this topic was quiet mind itself in terms of how it fits in. It's not mentioned in the first time I came across it was when David Johnson wasn't David Johnson's book, but in MN 111. There's no quiet mind there, and there's no quiet mind in any of the other The only thing, the other accounts of the stages in that I've come across in the Nikayas, the only thing I thought of was in I've always taken when Sariputta comes out of NP and NP and then reflects on what happened. I've always taken that as, which seems natural, as returns to a normal everyday state. But maybe at that point, he's actually moving into quiet mind. That's the only thing I could think of, but I wondered if you had other comments or thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I just saw this comment which says NP and NP is equal to quiet mind. So the experience of neither perception or non-perception itself is quiet mind. But in other words, quiet mind is the modern way of saying neither perception, non-perception. It's the equivalent. It's basically the experience of neither perception or non-perception is quiet mind itself.
Okay.
We call it quiet mind.
Yeah. It seemed to me that I came out of it into a very different kind of mental state. Came out of NP and NP.
So when you came out of it, meaning
went into what
after your meditation? Or
no, I mean in the meditation. It seemed to me that after being in quiet, in what I think of as quiet mind, I'm actually quite aware of what is going on. But maybe
so
I'm
that's
thinking about it.
That's getting into the territory of the signless state, the signless collectedness of mind. This is mentioned in Majjhima Nikaya 121 and a few other places. There's a whole section in which Mahamoggallana is going through each of the jhanas, and the Buddha says, go into this state, and finally he says, take the signless collectedness of mind. And the signless collectedness of mind is really what happens when the quiet mind becomes subtler and subtler and subtler, and finally, even that quiet mind as an object, say, or as a level of perception, is coarse. That also just completely disappears, and all there is just this, let's say, ray of awareness that doesn't land on any kind of object. It's like an objectless meditation. So this is the signless collectedness of mind. Some people have indicated that the signless collectedness of mind, could it be quiet mind as well? I'll give them that. I mean, it could just be quiet mind on a very, very, very quiet state. But I see it as being a separate stage. I see it being as like jhana 8.5, in the sense of it's just before the experience of cessation of perception field.
Or it could also be the void mind or the undirected mind, right?
Yes, that's right. Because we have three, actually, just to get things more interesting. We have the signless collectedness of mind, we have the void collectedness of mind, and we have the undirected. And what these are basically pointing to the same kind of experience, but from a different end. So the insight into impermanence makes the mind disinterested in any kind of object, and therefore there are no nimittas there. It's an animitta samadhi, which is to say objectless. So that's why we say signless, no signs there. There's no interest in taking anything as an object. Then we have the void, which understands or rather, let's say we have the undirected, which is to say the insight into dukkha makes one realize that any object is seen as being, therefore conditioned, therefore not worth holding on to. And so there's the disinterest there. There's no intention to direct the mind anywhere. It's this undirected collectedness. And then finally, you have the insight into anatta, which gives the experience of the voidness or emptiness, which is the quality of that state of mind, but also the understanding that all things are empty of self. Because of that insight, there is also that experience. So you can call it signless, you can call it void, you can call it undirected collectedness of mind.
So jhana 8.5. Okay. subsection B. And that was Sutta 121, Majjhima Nikaya.
121, yeah. It's the shorter discourse on emptiness or voidness.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I've got that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Any last questions?
Another question, but I just wanted to express my gratitude to everybody who helped make this retreat possible. It has really deepened my understanding and elevated my practice. So thank you to really everybody in front of and behind the scenes. It's been such a great experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing. Yeah, so before, actually, I was going to do the same. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yes, thank you to you and to Sil and to Kin. I was involved in it, and also my first guide in TWIM, and everyone else behind the scenes. It's really been a great retreat.
Happy to hear that. So I wanted to do the same thing, but you guys did it for me. But I also wanted to thank Sil and Kin because they've helped facilitate these Q&As, and you know, they've been working in the background. And then of course Kuhn, who's sort of the architect of the matrix. You know, he's the one who's like looking at the schedules and making sure everything's all in alignment and so on. Special thanks to him and everybody else. And thank you all, because you guys made the effort and progressed to immense ways last 9 days. So thank you for doing the work. It makes my job much easier. Share some merit.
May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving shed grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this retreat. Thank you to Delson and everyone behind the screen. If you like to do another retreat, we have the rule that people who haven't done a retreat with us before have priority, but there are often places still available. So in that case, you can join anytime. Thank you very much. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.